They said the blood was a punishment, a leaking sin, not illness, not nature, not a gentle rhythm written in the stars. No. In the year 1300, blood meant impurity, a woman whose body dared to whisper its crimson truth. Each month was a creature set apart, not sacred, not holy, not even fully human. In the valleys of France, the forests of Germany, and the echoing stone keeps of England, a girl's first period was not marked by celebration but by silence, by fear, by the beginning of concealment. Her name was Isabel, 13, freckled, with hair like dying straw and eyes too old for her face. Her father was a thatcher. Her mother had once been a midwife, before a whisper of witchcraft and 2 dead infants forced her into eternal penance. They lived in a cottage with no windows, with walls that smelled of peat and wet wool. The pigs lived closer to the hearth than the children. There was no schooling, no books, only stories, carried in mouths like rot. When the blood came, Isabel had been sleeping. She thought she was dying. She awoke sticky, hot between the legs, and the smell it was iron, earth, something wild. She tried to scrub it out with cold well water. It wouldn't stop. Her mother heard her sobbing and came like a ghost, silent, barefoot. She did not speak. She only took Isabel's arm, sat her down on the straw bed, and with slow fumbling hands, showed her how to fold old rags into squares, how to tie them with cord, how to hide them beneath layers of wool and shame. "You mustn't tell the priest," she whispered. "You mustn't let the pigs smell it. You must burn the cloth in the dark." Why? Isabel didn't ask. She already knew. Every girl knew. A woman's blood was feared like fire and revered like poison. It could sour milk. It could kill a crop. It could make a child still in the womb twist and die. The church had told them that Eve bled as punishment for her sins, and all her daughters would bleed as well, punished every month, until their bellies swelled with life. Then they would bleed even more. If they lived through the birth, they would be cleansed by 40 days of further bleeding. If they died, it was because God had seen fit to collect what was his. There were rules, written in the quiet laws of the body, enforced by mothers and midwives and priests. When you bled, you could not touch bread dough. You could not walk beneath a flowering tree. You could not enter the church, not even the back pews. To be seen with a red-stained rag was to invite questions. Was she cursed? Was she being punished? Or worse, was she a temptress now, a vessel of the devil's distraction? Isabel's brother Toma did not understand the sudden hush. He asked why she no longer ran barefoot with him to the stream, why she now refused to climb the beech tree near the chapel, why her face was always pale, lips tight, eyes haunted. She never answered. No girl did. To speak of the blood was to give it power. To name it was to risk being marked as unclean forever. One morning, during the weekly procession to the market, Jezebel felt the blood come again, hot, quick, ruthless. She paused behind a tree and checked her cloth. It had soaked through. Her shift was stained. Panic gripped her throat. She could not go home. Her mother would be furious, not for the mess, but for the danger. The market was holy ground, filled with eyes, men, the priest. She stole into a stable and tore a piece of horse blanket to replace the cloth. The rough wool burned against her thighs. She could not walk right, but she forced herself through the market, head bowed. Still, a woman saw the stain on her hem, and the woman spoke. One whisper, like rot in fruit, and it spread. "She bleeds. She is unclean. Do you smell it? Like copper." The priest was summoned. Father Alricold, blind in one eye, trembling from years of fasting and fear. He asked no questions. He placed a hand on her head and mumbled a prayer. "May the Lord cleanse the impure vessels of Eve." Jezebel was made to stand in the chapel's threshold while her mother knelt, weeping, before the altar. Her father did not come. He was working. Or maybe he had heard and chosen shame over kin. For a week, Jezebel was not allowed inside the house. She slept in the goat shed, wrapped in old burlap, and bled alone. Her mother brought her barley broth and hard cheese. "It will pass," she said. "It always passes." But it didn't pass. Not really. The blood came every moon, and with it came fear, silence, and shame. By 14, her body had shifted. Breasts, hips, curves, none of which she desired, all of which invited stares. One man, the butcher's apprentice, grabbed her arm and said he'd heard that bleeding girls made the best wives. Fertile, fresh, pliable. She spat on his boot and ran. But the word had been spoken. Wife. In the year 1300, to bleed was to be of marriageable age. It did not matter if you were 13, or terrified, or still played with sticks. Once you bled, you belonged to a man's future. You became a bargaining chip in the delicate game of dowries and goats and land. Isabel's mother arranged a meeting with the miller's son. He was 17, quiet, strong. He barely looked at Jezebel, only at her mother's hands and the slope of the land behind their cottage. He asked about chickens. He asked if Jezebel could sew. He did not ask her name. Jezebel did not speak that night. She walked into the forest instead, let the cool moss cradle her bare feet. She bled again under the moonlight, onto the roots of an old ash tree, and for once did not hide it. She felt something stir in the darks, something older than the church, older than sin, something watching, something that did not see her as broken or dirty, but sacred. She returned home to find the door barred. Her mother had locked her out. The priest came, she said through the wood. He said, "Your blood has cursed the land. The cows won't breed. The wheat rots in the field. Your protest." Isabel slept in the cold again. Her body shook. The cloth between her legs had turned black. Fever crept behind her eyes. She dreamed of fire and hands and laughter that was not kind. The next day, 3 women came. Not the priest this time. These were They smelled of herbs and old milk. They took her to the edge of the village and made her drink a bitter tea. They whispered of cleansing, of casting out the heat. They gave her burning stones to place near her thighs, told her to sleep with them against her skin. When she cried, they sang. Not hymns, not church songs, something older, crooked, broken melodies passed from mother to daughter in secret. That night, Isabel bled again, heavier than ever. She woke to find the straw soaked, her thighs streaked red, her cloth gone. She screamed. No one came. She had learned quickly not to speak of it, not to mention the ache in her lower back, or the dizziness that came in waves as her blood leaked, slow and constant, into the wool and linen rags she had torn in secret. Aline was 12 when it first came. Her mother had slapped her not out of cruelty, but tradition and whispered, "Now you are ready." Ready for what? She had not known, only that her body had betrayed her, and from that moment onward, she was watched more closely, spoken of more softly, and locked in the house when men came near. The red was not a beginning. It was an end to childhood, to play, to joy. In the town of Akucheval, no one dared name it plainly. They called it the moon's penance, or Eve's burden, or the crimson rot, as though it were a curse handed down for a woman's ancient sin. When a girl began to bleed, it was said her womb opened like the gate of hell, and with it came spirits, misfortune, and unclean winds. Women who bled too long were thought to be witches. Those who bled not at all were barren, cursed by God. There was no winning. There was only surviving. Aline had once overheard the priest in the chapel whisper to another, "They bleed because they are broken, because they are born from the rib, not the breath. Their bodies decay as they live." She had clutched her stomach tighter that night, fearing the rot that must be within her, fearing that the more she bled, the closer she came to dying without ever being told why. They gave her yarrow to chew, though it tasted of dust. They tied herbs to her thighs, with threads pulled from burial shrouds. An old woman burned hen feathers and waved the smoke at her belly. Still, it came, month after month, and Aline began to count her life in stains and silences. On the 3rd month, when her rags soaked through and her skirt bore the mark, she had run to the well to scrub it, only to find 2 boys watching, laughing, calling her a red dog. Her brother struck them both, but her shame remained. It was the midwife, Isabel, who told her the truth, though even that truth was crooked. Isabel had hands like bark and eyes that had seen every horror a womb could hold. She had delivered stillborns with their mouths open in silent screams, pulled dead mothers from blood-soaked sheets, seen tumors burst and women rot from inside. She told Aline that the blood was not a punishment, but a warning. The body knows before the mind. When the blood comes, it means you can carry life, but life grows in pain. But no one taught her how to stop the chafing, the fevers, the smell. Linen was rare and costly. Most used wool, but it scratched and held the blood like a sponge. Some tried moss, but if left too long, it festered. Aline had once begged her mother for cotton soft clean, almost magic, but cotton was for the noble. The poor bled into scraps, then boiled them in cauldrons with lye, hoping to use them again. If you bled too much, there was no doctor, only leeches, or prayers, or sometimes the bony dull, a cruel little tool used to rebalance the humors by carving a line into the back to let the bad blood out. And there was the other side of it, darker still. A girl who bled was prey. There was a man who watched her, Sir Gervais, the Reeves' cousin. He came to collect taxes but lingered too long, asked too many questions. "You're ripe now," he once whispered, and a lion had felt the bile rise in her throat. Her father had heard and said nothing, because Gervais had power, because Aline's body was now a ledger to be read by men. Womb, hips, blood. The church said a woman's blood made her unfit to touch holy things. No bread, no wine, no altars. Some priests refused to look a bleeding woman in the eye, fearing her gaze would curdle milk or twist unborn calves in their mothers. Aline once tried to confess during her bleeding days, only to be turned away. "The devil is closer to you now," the friar had muttered. "He whispers through your womb." When Margot, the baker's daughter, died from an unseen sickness, the town blamed her blood. They said she had bled too long, too wide, that she had hidden it instead of purifying herself. Her body was buried not in the graveyard, but in the forest, among the Her mother tore her own hair and screamed to the sky, "It's just blood, it's just blood." But no one listened. So Aline learned to move quietly. She counted her days by the moon. She washed her claws by night, far from the well, where no one could see the water turn red. She kept rosemary beneath her bed to ward off spirits, though she didn't believe it worked. She had dreams of drowning in her own blood, of waking to find her bed soaked through and rats gnawing at the edge of her skirts. And then came the storm. It was not a storm of wind or rain but of men. A new bishop had arrived from Rouen, tall, pale, thin-lipped, Bishop Guillaume. He hated women. It was said his own mother had bled for weeks and died shrieking, and now he sought to punish every womb in penance. He declared a new decree. All bleeding women must be examined. The devil uses the womb as his nest. Women were stripped, searched, smelled. If their blood smelled sweet, it was said the devil was inside them. If it smelled bitter, they were only unclean. Isabel refused. "You will not touch my girls," she said. She was seized. They burned her hands so she could not deliver babes. Then they tied her to the market cross and left her for 2 days in the rain. Aline stood in the crowd and wept. She did not look away when Isabel screamed. Soon after, the trials began. Girls as young as 10 were dragged to the cathedral and made to show their rags. If there were too many stains, they were accused of hiding demons. One girl had worms in her cloth. Her family was poor, and they reused what they could. The bishop declared it proof. Worms are the serpent's children. She was hanged in the square. The next day, her mother slit her own throat with a spindle. Aline knew she was next. She had begun bleeding heavier. Her rags never dried. Her body weakened. She walked like a ghost. She dreamed of Isabel's voice. Life grows in pain. Pain grows in silence. Her silence was killing her. One night, she fled. She crept from her home under the cover of dark, rags hidden in her bodice, rosemary wrapped in her shawl. She went to the forest not to die, but to beg for help. There was talk of a woman in the woods, a crone who had once been a nun, cast out for bleeding through her habit. They called her La, the Bloody One, said she spoke with wolves and danced with ghosts. Aline prayed. The stories were lies, but she had no choice, either the forest or the fire. The moon was full. Her legs shook. Her blood soaked down her thighs, warm and shameful. She followed the sound of a Belfend hollow, and then she saw her. La was not old, not really. Her face was lined, but her eyes were sharp. She wore red bright, unholy red. Aline fell to her knees and sobbed. "They will kill me," she whispered. The woman knelt, touched her chin. "They always try, but your blood is not a curse. Child, it is the price of power." It was in the winter of her 16th year that the bleeding returned, not with stealth, but as a sudden flood like red wine spilled upon snow. Marin had known pain, the slow ache of limbs worked to the bone, the dull scream of a back hunched in field and fire. But this was different. It was as though her body betrayed her from within, as though her womb had become a cathedral of rot, weeping penance from the altar of her loins. The claws she had hidden beneath her skirts were soaked through in hours. She could not rise without feeling it run warm, thick, shameful. She dared not let the sisters see, not with Sister Dorothea watching her with that fox-eyed scrutiny, always muttering under her breath about ungrateful girls who carry curses in their blood. One evening, she fainted during prayer. Her knees struck the stone with a sharp crack, and when she was lifted, the hem of her habit was dark with her blood. The other girls recoiled. One crossed herself, another whispered the word which under her breath. They took her to the infirmary, a chamber of lime-washed walls and dried rosemary, where the old midwife, Agnes, still served in silence. Agnes had once been a village healer before the bishop declared her arts not of God, but the priory had kept her in secret, half servant, half shadow. She washed Marin gently, without scorn, and held her when the cramps left her writhing. But even Agnes could not explain the bleeding that never ceased. "There's rot in you," she whispered one night, her hands trembling as she folded a clean cloth beneath Marin's hips. "Something ancient, something born before words. I've seen it in girls taken by the Moor spirit. I've seen it in those who dream too much." She lit a tallow candle and placed it at the foot of the bed. "Sleep. If it visits you again, do not speak, do not answer it." But the dreams came regardless. Dreams of iron teeth and thorns. Dreams of a woman with hollow eyes who sat at the end of the bed and sang in a tongue older than Latin, her song rising and falling with the rhythm of Moran's pain. In the morning, the sheets were always red, and someone, every time, had braided rosemary into her hair while she slept. Word spread. It always did. The sisters gossiped behind their rosaries, and the chaplain began skipping her name in mass. Even Father Anselm, who once defended her, now looked through her as if afraid that a shadow might poison his eyes. When Agnes tried to make tinctures from yarrow and nettle, the concoctions turned black in the cup. When she buried charms of salt and iron beneath the bed, they were dug up the next day, burned and left in the hallway like an accusation. And then the bleeding worsened. One morning Marin awoke to find the skin between her thighs blistered raw. The blood came in clots like crushed berries, and the pain was so sharp she screamed. The nuns said it was penance, that her suffering was God reminding the flesh of its filth. "Women are born to bleed," hissed Sister Dorothea, as Eve bled beneath the serpent's gaze. "Do not resist what has been written in your flesh." But Marin could no longer walk. Her limbs trembled, her skin was cold even in the firelight, and in her sleep she whispered names no one recognized. It was Agnes who first spoke the word aloud. "Prosect," not in the open, but behind locked doors, with a crucifix pressed to her chest and her eyes darting like a hunted deer. "I've seen this before," she said. "In the east, near Bohemia, a girl who bled for a season without end. The priests called it the devil's cradle, said her womb was a gateway to hell. They sealed her mouth with wax and buried her in lime." She looked at Marin with pity and dread. "You must leave. They will not save you. They will salt the earth beneath your bed and call it a blessing." But Marin could not run. The snow had thickened, and the gates were blocked. She was watched, night and day, even in her illness. Sister Dorothea had begun writing letters to whom no one knew, and whispers of a delegation from the bishopric began to circulate. It was then that Marin began to hear voices, not in her dreams, but in the stone itself. Whispers that echoed through walls and columns, through the bones of saints buried beneath the floor. They spoke in riddles, in syllables that made the ears ache. And sometimes, when she closed her eyes, she understood them. They did not offer salvation, only truth. They told her of the bleeding women buried beneath cathedrals, whose bodies had been split for science and then burned for heresy. They told her of the old gods, of bone altars and moon blood, of sacred cycles that men called curses. And they told her that she was not sick, only awakened. The night before the delegation arrived, Agnes came to her room one final time. She carried a flask of bitter wine and a small bundle of herbs. "I can help you leave your body," she said, "but only for a time. You will feel nothing. It may be your only peace." Marin shook her head. There was something inside her now, a hunger for knowledge, for truth, for justice. If she was damned, then she would damn them all with her. Agnes wept and kissed her brow. "Then may your pain be remembered. May it stay in their books and their prayers." When the priests came, Marin was ready. She sat upright on her bed, her skin pale as wax, her eyes like embers. They spoke Latin and held relics, but she answered them in the old Tunde, one from her dreams, and the air grew cold. The story of Marin, the bleeding girl, would spread, distorted by fear and smoke, told in taverns and monasteries as a warning. Some said she'd burst into flame, others that she vanished in a storm of moths. But Agnes knew the truth. And in the years to come, women would find rosemary tucked beneath their pillows during their first blood, and feel no fear. They would remember a name whispered through stone. Marin, Marin, the girl who bled and would not bow. But the worst part was not the pain, nor the smell, nor the fear of being cast aside like waste. It was the silence. In the great stone houses of England and France, in the wood-planked homes of Flanders and Saxony, girls bled in shame and secrecy. There were no books to consult, no midwife if your family could not afford one, and no certainty that what your body was doing wouldn't be read as witchcraft. You see, in 1300, knowledge was both rare and dangerous. A literate woman was suspicious, a curious woman was dangerous, and a woman who knew her own body intimately, boldly, truthfully was damned. She could be beaten, locked away, even tried. For to know too much about one's own bleeding was to tempt the devilish curiosity. In the convents, too, it was no safer. Behind those thick walls of cold piety and whispered prayers, the nuns bled in silence. Clothes were washed in secrecy, dried under beds, or burned in kitchens where no one looked. Some saw their monthly blood as punishment for Eve's sin. Others, in quiet defiance, believed it sacred, a silent offering to the God who had made them both cursed and holy. But even among the sisters, a girl whose cycle didn't behave, who bled too long or too heavily, was said to be possessed. A fault in the soul, not just the womb. And so came the salt on the doorstep, the holy water flicked on bedsheets, the whispered Ave Marias when her face grew pale and her step grew slow. But not all who bled did so in fear. In some corners of Italy and Castile, older women underwent herbs, oils, and rituals. Mugwort to calm cramps, yarrow tea to slow heavy flow, linen tied to the thigh, knotted just so. They taught in murmurs, behind bakery doors and market stalls, passing knowledge the way a flame is passed, quiet, trembling, and powerful. Yet even they lived with one foot in the grave, for healing and heresy were often the same thing. If a woman helped another woman too well, the town might whisper, and if enough whispers grew legs, she'd find herself chained and questioned. "Where did you learn this?" they'd ask. "Why do you know the body so well?" And there, under the heat of fire, or the icy breath of the dungeon, her bleeding would return, but not as nature, as confession. Even childbirth was not redemption. The agony of labor was seen as payment for the sin of menstruation. And if a woman died giving birth on so many did it, was said God had claimed her too soon. Perhaps mercifully, perhaps not. The midwives knew the signs. When a girl was too thin, too pale, when her periods had stopped or turned black. But to speak openly was to risk one's neck, so they used euphemisms. "She has the moon's sorrow. Her red days have gone mad." Sometimes they blamed demons. Sometimes they simply prayed. Let me tell you a final story. Not a tale of kings or queens, but of a village girl named Liane from a cold hamlet near the Baltic Sea. She was 15 when she first bled, and her mother, a stern woman with no surviving daughters, gave her a linen rag and said, "Don't let the boys smell it." That was all. Liane, curious and unafraid, asked the priest the next day what the blood meant. He looked at her, eyes wide, and said nothing. The following week, she began to cramp so badly she could not walk. Her belly swelled, her back arched, and her scream broke the silence of the chapel. They said it was the devil inside her, that she had opened the door by asking forbidden questions. They tied her wrists and put ash on her tongue. The priest came with his book, and the villagers with their fear. When she did not stop bleeding, they put her in the river to see if she would float. She sank, not because she was innocent, nor guilty, but because she was tired, because her body, sacred and human, had never been taught how to live with what it was. Liane became a whisper, a warning, a tale told two daughters. Ask too much, and you'll bleed like the girl in the river. Her mother, they said, burned all the clothes and left the house forever. But some say that when the moon is high and the snow melts near that river, you can still see the red smear on the stones, a reminder not of witchcraft, nor sin boot of ignorance, of a time when to bleed was to suffer alone. And so the question remains, what if you got your period in the year 1300? You'd hide, you'd ache, you'd be told it was your fault. You'd pray it would end quickly, quietly. You would learn to measure your worth by how well you concealed your pain. You might seek wisdom in whispered. You might fear the girl next door for bleeding too soon or too late. You would not speak of it, not in the square, not at the table, not even to your own daughter. And the cycle would continue not just in blood, but in silence. But perhaps the cruelest fate of all is this. Even as your body obeyed the call of nature, your soul would be punished for it. You would be born guilty, live ashamed, and die misunderstood. And in the centuries that followed, your pain would not be recorded, your clothes not preserved, your stories not remembered. Only now, in hushed studies and reconstructed histories, are we beginning to piece you back together, not as witch nor monster, but as woman, as girl, as child, human, utterly and entirely. That, perhaps, is the truest tragedy. Not the pain, not the blood, but the erasure. What if you got your period in the year 1300? You'd survive if barely, but no one would ever know it.